Hey!
Happy 4th of July! Woo!
Yay, America. Yay,
Yes.
freedom. Yay, God. We always like to say, God chose Israel, the Jewish people. America chose God from its very
That's right.
initial founding. And so there's a lot to celebrate today. We hope you are eating too much. Hope you're seeing friends today, people that you enjoy. Maybe you're listening to this on the way to a get-together of some sort to maybe blow some things up. And as our founding fathers would have wanted. That was one of the little-known writings of Thomas Jefferson. He hoped that you would eat too many hot dogs and blow some stuff up, because that's what he would have wanted. But we have a tradition here, Flyover Conservative Show, of on the holidays we really want to draw attention towards where did they come from and why, what's the history behind it, and I think increasing our knowledge of where we come from, what we're about, our heritage. There's been such an attack on some of those things.
True.
And we have an incredible guest today. There's certain hotels, like when you walk into a Trump hotel, we were just in Doral.
It smells good.
It's when I walk, I smell. I feel
rich.
I feel rich.
Yeah.
I feel successful. Just like. I guess that's what prosperity smells like. That's maybe what Donald Trump would smell like. I don't know. I'd hate to sniff him if I ever met him. I've never met him, but
that would be too weird. That'd be Joe Biden.
I would assume that's what he would smell like. Stacy has some pajamas she buys from Nordstrom's. I've been buying her for the gift for years, and there's a material. They just feel so good when she puts them on. She's like,
It just feels so good.
When I put on these pajamas, I just feel
They're
really
luxurious.
I just feel successful. These just feel like it's a great way to end the day. Today's guest, when I listen to today's guest, this guy, when I read his books and I'm around him and I hear him, I don't know if it makes me smarter, but I feel smarter.
True.
I feel just a pride in our country. Because it's wisdom. There's difference between just good ideas and just depth wisdom that stands the test of time, rooted in God's word, and then manifested in an incredible expression. And so he's the author of many books. I joke he's probably written more books than many of you have probably read, probably me included. Mm-hmm. Just amazing. One I want to really highlight is called Socialism, The Real History from Plato to the Present. And if you want to know, it says how the deep state capitalizes on crisis and consolidation of control. The ability to take control of facets of your life through the creation of crisis. It's not an accident, and it's not new, and it's not isolated to just our country. So if you want to kind of know the playbook of what's going on, that's one. Today we're going to really highlight a book called Miracles in American History by an even better author, his wife. So today we have joined us the one, the only, Bill Federer.
Yay!
Well, David, Stacy, great to be with you.
Welcome, Bill. Thanks for joining us on the 4th of July. This is an exciting time for our country.
We've done deep dives and everything from St. Patrick's Day and the history of him as a person to Christmas and Thanksgiving and all kinds of things. And this is our actually second edition of the 4th of July. So like our show's starting to kind of gain some maturity. We got some history and some history with you. Now this is year 2 of a deep dive. I know we got new angles. We can never exhaust it all. And I'm excited to dig into this stuff with you today.
Well, I'm thrilled, and the Miracles in American History is an exciting book. My wife has heard me speak for 30 years. She says that she picked out the best stories, and those are ones where there's a crisis, they pray and have courage, and things turn around. And
I love it.
There's 50 stories in there. Every page is in color. It's D. James Kennedy Ministry offered it as a gift edition, and then we continued printing it. So just thought I'd share some of those stories today.
It's a beautiful book. I really recommend this again, Flyover family, to go on AmericanMinute.com. You can purchase this book, Miracles in American History, because there are stories that you want to read, and then you're going to be talking about. It'll make you seem more interesting than you probably really are when you're talking to your friends in the break room and the water cooler, because you can kind of take these and they're in your head and you can share them. And even if you don't read it, it's such a beautiful book. It's a hardcover copy. I always joke, some books it makes you look better just having it on the bookshelf. So even if you don't read it, it's not in your head. It's good to have it on your shelf and have the intention. At least shows a humility that you value wisdom.
And I love it because it is about answered prayers. And right now, there's a lot of people that are praying for our country and praying for miracles to happen. And so this is an encouragement to actually read answered prayers here, because we are pulling that into this time right now. We need God to answer our prayers, and I really believe He is. So,
and there are just some crazy stories too when you go through it. So
Yep.
I'm excited to dive into some of them today.
Yeah, there was a father that told me that he was reading one story a night to his son before he went to sleep, because they're short stories. They're only like maybe 4 or 5 pages each. And by the end of the month, he finished the book, and then the son said, well, aren't you going to read from that book again? Right? He said, he
Wow.
really liked those stories. So
That's awesome.
it's great for kids. And but anyway, would love to jump into it.
Let's do
Let's
it.
do it.
Well, the overall picture is that the King of England was the most powerful king on planet Earth. He was a globalist. The sun never set on the British Empire. He had India, Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong, British Guyana, Canada, Barbados, Bermuda, Jamaica, and America. And America's founders decided they didn't like a globalist king telling us what to do, so they broke away and they flipped it and they made the people the king. So the word citizen is Greek. It means co-king. And so a republic is where the people are king ruling through their representatives. And so when we pledge allegiance to the flag and to the republic for which it stands, we're basically pledging allegiance to us being in charge of ourselves. And so when somebody protests the flag, what they're saying is, I don't want to be the king anymore.
Wow.
I protest this system where I participate in ruling myself. It's like, okay, somebody else will tell you what to do. And anyway, so we appreciate the founding fathers, and they signed the Declaration of Independence, which basically, if they had not have won, every name on there would have been killed, right? John Hancock was the first to sign. He was the president of the Continental Congress at the time. And he said, I wrote it so big, his name, that the king can read it without his spectacles, his glasses. And then Ben Franklin signed and said, we must hang together or most assuredly we will hang separately. And Sam Adams said, we have this day restored the sovereign to whom all men ought to be obedient. He reigns in heaven, and from the rising to the setting of the sun, let his kingdom come. And then in the Declaration, it has laws of nature and of nature's God. So there's a reference there. All men are created equal, and they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. Jefferson said unalienable, and Adams said inalienable. And anyway, the king didn't believe that. The king believed that all men were not created equal. He believed he was created a little extra special. It's called the divine right of kings. God chose me to be the king, and he gives all the power to me, and I dispense it to these lowly subjects. So kings have subjects who are subjected to their will. Democracies and republics have citizens, which means co-ruler, co-king. And then there's the appealing to the supreme judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions. Little background. The British had a navy with tall masts on the ships. These were the engines. These were like on an F-16, you have an engine, but on a ship, the mast is what moves it. And so they got these masts, these long wooden poles, from trees in Maine. Now, Maine used to be northern Massachusetts. It wasn't until 1820 that Maine split off to become its own state as a free state to counterbalance Missouri coming in 1820 as a slave state. Anyway, in the early 1700s, the king's agent would come onto your farm and find the tallest, best trees and take out a hatchet and make a mark on them, and then open up a little book and make a notation in the little book, and that tree now belonged to the king, and you could never touch it. And he would go anywhere he wanted and would just keep marking these trees. And so the first rebellion, so to speak, in America was the Pine Tree Riots. And so a bunch of guys with their faces covered with soot broke into the inn where the king's agent was staying, and had at nighttime and had pine switches, and they whipped the poor guy till he was black and blue. And they eventually caught those guys, and they were reprimanded. And then later there was an actual battle, a pine tree flag battle. And so the pine tree was a symbol of rebellion against the king. And so when the revolution starts, George Washington pays for 6 boats. They are called the Washington's Cruisers, and they have a flag, which is some consider the original flag for America, and it's called the Pine Tree flag, and it's a green pine tree on a white background, and above it, it says, an appeal to heaven. And so you have a court case and you lose. Well, you appeal it. Well, you lose again. What do? You appeal it to the Supreme Court. Well, in England, the king was the final court. But what if you don't get justice then? You appeal to heaven. You go above the king's head and you appeal straight to heaven, straight to God. And so that's where this phrase came from in the Declaration, appealing to the supreme judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions. In other words, we are going above the king's head. We're going straight to God.
Wow.
And so that's an appeal, is including God in our formation as a country. And then the last of the four references to God is with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence. And the 1828 Webster's Dictionary says, by providence, it is commonly understood to mean the will of God. And so it's a surrendering to the will. And again, I do want to mention that the second mention, that all men are created equal, the little illustration there is the king has this divine right of king, creator king people. In America, it's the creator to each person. We're all equal, and we choose our political leaders from amongst equals. And so a copy of the Declaration was rushed out to George Washington, who was in New York. And he has it read out loud to his troops. And then immediately afterwards, he has an order given. And it says that the general hopes and trusts that every officer and man will endeavor to live and act as becomes a Christian soldier, defending the dearest rights and liberties of his country. And he appoints chaplains to every regiment. And then you have the Battle of Brooklyn Heights there in New York. And so the situation was that we were picking a fight, again, with the most powerful military on the planet. And you have the harbor in New York begins to fill up, and there are 400 ships with 32,000 troops. Different observers said that it looked like the harbor turned into a forest of trees. And so all of a sudden it's getting serious, right? We just prior to this was the Battle of Bunker Hill, and then the cannons put on Dorchester Heights there in Boston, and the British evacuated, and that was a pretty easy thing. And we think, well, this rebellion is going to be easy. But then this harbor fills up with the most powerful military ever assembled in world history, with all the gunpowder of all the ships. And so the Continental Congress has a day of fasting that they had passed unanimously. They passed it a month or so earlier. We earnestly recommend that the 17th of May, 1776 be observed as a day of humiliation, fasting, and prayer, that we may with united hearts confess and bewail our manifold sins and transgressions.
Wow,
and
that'd
by
be a good thing to continue.
No, as I was just thinking.
And by a sincere repentance and amendment of life, appease God's righteous displeasure, and through the merits and mediation of Jesus Christ, obtain his pardon and forgiveness. So this is unanimously approved just a month and a half before the Declaration of Independence is signed. That day of fasting, by the way, they rushed that out to George Washington, and he has it read to his troops. And he says the Continental Congress, having ordered Friday the 17th instant to be observed as a day of fasting, humiliation, and prayer, humbly to supplicate the mercy of Almighty God, that it would please him to pardon all our manifold sins and transgressions. The general commands all officers and soldiers to pay strict obedience to the orders of the Continental Congress, that by their unfeigned and pious observance of their religious duties, they may incline the Lord and Giver of victory to prosper our arms. So this is George Washington ordering his troops in New York to observe this day of fasting and prayer.
Wow.
And as the harbor fills up, George Washington writes to his younger brother, John Augustine Washington, we expect a very bloody summer of it at New York. We are not either in men or arms prepared for it. If our cause is just, as I do most religiously believe it to be, the same providence which has in many instances appeared for us will still go on to afford us its aid. And so, again, Washington is referring to providence, to the will of God. Mm-hmm. And as I mentioned, back then, it was considered that saying the name of Jesus was a little bit informal. And so they would use terms to refer to God that was more majestic. And so one of those was the term providence. You read Washington's books, and the young men would even address their mother and father as ma'am or sir. Mm-hmm. And so even in the home, it was more of a formal. And so they referred, so Webster's 1828 dictionary, providence, the care and superintendence which God exercises over his creatures by divine providence, it is understood God himself. So back to New York. The harbor fills up with these 400 ships, and it's getting serious. Washington expects an attack from the water, very similar to what happened there at Bunker Hill and Dorchester Heights. And so Washington has all his men dug in. And if you can see on the map there, the Americans are the blue line, and they're dug in facing the water. Well, there was a loyalist. Now, a loyalist is somebody who lives in America, but they're loyal to the enemy, right? The king. I know it's hard for us to imagine that you could actually have somebody living in America that's not loyal to America, but this was the case back then. And so this loyalist shows the British where to land far away from where Washington's men are, and then march all night long in a circle through Jamaica Pass, and then attack Washington from behind on the morning of August 27th of 1776. And so it's an interesting, when you read it, there were 2 sentries or guards who were in charge of being there in Jamaica Pass. And it's quiet. They're far away from the water. They don't think they're going to see any action. And then they hear troop movement. Of course, it's pitch black. And they ride up along with the troops that are moving, assuming that they're Americans. And they comment, it's been pretty quiet tonight. How about you guys? And look over, and it's the British Army.
Oh.
And the British Army says, you are not going to warn anybody. And then they go to an inn, and they ask the innkeeper to show them the pass, through this backwards Jamaica Pass, and he wouldn't. And the guy, the British officer, pulls out his pistol, cocks it, and sticks it to the guy's head, and says, "You're going to show us the pass." And so he led him through the pass, and so they attacked Washington from behind, August 27th, 1776. It's the biggest battle of the entire Revolutionary War. 3,000 American troops are surprised and killed.
Oh, man.
Only 300 British. It's totally lopsided.
That's bad.
And Washington's men are scrambling, trying to find cover because they're all being attacked from behind. And Washington sees from a distance the brave Maryland Regiment. These young men, there's 400 of them, they turn and they charge directly into the British lines. And then they charge again, and they charge again 6 times until all of them are killed. But it keeps the British occupied while the rest of Washington's army can turn around and find cover. And Washington sees them from a distance, and he says, "Good God, what brave fellows I have lost this day." Well, the sun goes down, and now Washington is pinned up against the water. And he has these, 8,000 British troops behind him. He's got the East River in front of him, and he's probably got thoughts going through his head that the next day the British could attack, and Washington will be captured and killed for leading this rebellion against the king. But instead, Washington has an idea, and he decides he's going to get every boat he can find and ferry the troops across the East River to Manhattan Island. And he actually got the Durham boats that John Durham, and he had up in Massachusetts. The original American Navy started with the Massachusetts Navy. And so these big boats were used to carry iron ore down the river. And so they brought them there, and they were able to all night long ferry Washington's troops across the East River. And they're moving cannons and horses, and they're doing it in pitch black, and they're doing it as quiet as could be. And, but suddenly the sun starts to come up, and they had only moved half of the army. And now Washington's a real sitting duck. He doesn't have enough troops left to fight the British. They would get overrun very easily. And then the troops that are strung across the water, a couple cannonballs will disrupt that, and it looks bad. But Washington's chief of intelligence is Major Ben Talmadge. And he writes, as the dawn of the next day approached, those of us who remained in the trenches became very anxious for our own safety.
I bet.
Yeah, half your team's gone.
And when the dawn appeared, there were several regiments still on duty. At this time, a very dense fog began to rise off the river, and it seemed to settle in a peculiar manner over both encampments. I recollect this peculiar providential occurrence perfectly well. And so very dense was the atmosphere that I could scarcely discern a man at 6 yards distance. Wow. We tarried until the sun had risen, but the fog remained as dense as ever. And so Washington continues to move all of his troops across, and he is on the last boat that leaves. He leaves, the fog lifts, the British charge, and no one's there.
Oh, wow. That is a miracle.
That is a miracle.
This was the last chance the British had to capture the entire American army all at once.
It could have all been done right then. The whole deal, the whole America, the whole revolution kaput.
Yeah, at that time.
Could have been done that day.
Yeah, and it's Washington later writes to his, he says, the hand of Providence has been so conspicuous in the course of the war that he must be worse than an infidel that lacks faith. But it will be time enough for me to turn preacher when my present appointment ceases.
Wow.
So that was the Battle of Brooklyn Heights. And so the British take over New York. And the plan was that the British that landed in New York would go up the Hudson River to Albany. And then there was another British general, Johnny Burgoyne, that would land in Canada and march down the Hudson River Valley. And they would meet up at Albany. They would capture the capital of New York. They would be following the river valley, which would split the state of New York in half, but it also would split America in half, with the New England colonies on one side and the middle southern colonies on the other. So this would be an important battle. Now, unbeknownst to the general in Canada, the British commander in New York decided to not follow that plan and go to Philadelphia, because the English European warfare, if you capture your enemy's capital, the war's over. And Philadelphia was the capital. And so he thought, if I could capture that, I'll get the glory. The generals had a jealousy amongst themselves. Anyway, so here you have this general, Johnny Burgoyne, lands in Canada, June of 1777, and he's going to march down from Canada, down this Hudson River Valley, then come to Albany, and he has 6,000 British soldiers. And he recaptures Fort Ticonderoga, right? It had been a British fort. It was captured by Ethan Allen, and then the cannons were taken from Fort Ticonderoga to Dorchester Heights, which were put on the hill that caused the British to evacuate Boston's harbor. But the British recapture Fort Ticonderoga, and then they proceed down the Hudson River Valley. Well, they do something. You have this British general, Johnny Burgoyne. He meets with the Mohawk Indians, and he promises them money for scalps. And he says, look, you go in front of the British Army and you scalp the Americans. And so this was so bad that it's even listed in the Declaration as one of the reasons that we rebelled against the king. He has incited domestic insurrection among us, and he's endeavored to have the Indian savages on the frontier, whose known rule of warfare is an indistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. And so here's the British. I mean, this is a foreign power coming into the country, stirring up violence.
Wow.
This ends up becoming a pattern that's later called critical race theory, and it's used by different other powers to take over countries, right? You go into a country, you find the groups, and then you stir them up to have internal violence. And so here you have an interesting story. There's a loyalist in New York named David Jones. Again, one of those loyalists, lives in America, loyal to the British, and he is engaged to his fiancee, Jane McCrae. And when the British General Johnny Burgoyne lands in Canada, David Jones kisses his fiancée goodbye and says, I'm going to join the British general. We'll drive out these rebel Americans. We'll get married, have a great life. And so he leaves. Well, these Indians, they're going ahead of the British Army and they're scalping Americans. And then in the evening, after scalping, they would take the scalps, put them on sticks, and then they would dance around the fire, and it's called the scalp dance. And they would, want to show off their kill for the evening. And so as they're getting close to the settlement that David Jones was at, the Indians come in one night, and one of their scalps is this nice, long, beautiful hair that David Jones recognizes.
Oh, no.
Sure enough, it was his fiancée, Jane McCrae.
Oh.
Well, the Indians couldn't tell who's an American and who's a British. We all sort of look the same to the Indians.
Yeah.
And so they go into this New York settlement and they grab this girl, Jane McCrae, and they begin to fight over her. And the one Indian just flat out takes his hatchet and chops off her scalp. And of course, she dies. And then comes into the camp with his prize scalp. And so when David Jones recognizes this, the British soldiers go to General Johnny Burgoyne and they say, what were you thinking? These Indians can't tell who's an American and who's a loyalist. And so this forces the General Johnny Burgoyne to go back and meet with the Mohawk Indians and tell them that they need to tone it down. Well, the Indians don't know tone it down. They know on and off. They're at peace, they're at war. And when it's war, it's total war. And they don't have any, it's not like, we tell our soldiers, in Iraq or Afghanistan, don't shoot at the Islamist enemy, when they're in the middle of the street. Wait till they get into a house and then get all set up and shoot at you. Then you can shoot them again. Mm-hmm. So we tell our guys, limited warfare stuff. Well, not them. And so the Indians get offended and they leave. And they suddenly abandon this British General Johnny Burgoyne. And he's left in the middle of the New York forest. It's the Adirondack. It's very thick forest. And the Indians had been their eyes and ears. They were their scouts. They were telling us, well, the Americans are here. Now this British army is blind. So all of a sudden the tables turn. And instead of the British being on the offensive, they don't know where they are, where the Americans are. They don't know anything, and they're surrounded. And it's called the Battle of Saratoga. And the Americans capture 6,000 British soldiers.
Wow.
Now, that's a big deal.
Yep.
If we would have 6,000 of our soldiers captured somewhere, that would be a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Because they got their weapons, their supplies, their rations, probably they probably had better boots. They probably had, all kinds of things that were beneficial.
Yeah. And so the surrender of the British at Saratoga is recorded in a painting. And this painting hangs in our U.S. Capitol Rotunda in Washington, D.C. Right.
Wow.
And when word of this victory ricochets around the world, it gets over to Ben Franklin, who is in Paris, and he goes into the court of King Louis XVI, and he says, hey, the Americans just captured 6,000 British. Now, the King of France was not in a hurry to get into another war with Britain. The last time he was in a war with Britain, he lost everything west of the Appalachian Mountains. Right, so west of the Appalachians was French territory, and really all the way to the Rockies. But when they lost, the French quickly gave everything west of the Mississippi to Spain in a secret treaty. And so the British thought, we're going to get it all, and all of a sudden they say, west of the Mississippi is Spanish, and the British are like, well, we don't want to get into a war with Spain. We're already busy with the war, so we'll just sort of leave everything west of the Mississippi alone. And then that became called the Louisiana Territory. But this was a big deal, this victory at Saratoga. And General Washington writes to his younger brother, John Augustine. He says, I most devoutly congratulate my country and every well-wisher to the cause on this signal stroke of providence. And the Continental Congress is so happy that they have the first national day of Thanksgiving after the Declaration had been written. And they wrote, with one heart and one voice, join in penitent confession of their manifold sins, that it may please God through the merits of Jesus Christ, mercifully to forgive and blot them out. I just think that it's pretty interesting that the very first national day of Thanksgiving says through the merits of Jesus Christ. And then it goes on, and under the providence of Almighty God, secure for these United States the greatest of all human blessings, independence and peace. So that's the Battle of Saratoga.
I mean,
Well,
none of those battles could have been. I mean, that was the point of the book, is God's intervention, which I the whole time you're talking, I just think about the times we're in right now, and it's kind of gotten. There's a pastor friend of ours that they would joke about him. He has a large staff, and the staff would get together and they would talk about a problem. We should do this and maybe that, and he's kind of an older pastor. He'd be at the end of the table, and finally somebody would pipe in and say, maybe we need to pray about it. And he would always lean in and say, so it's come to that. It's kind of his joke there. But, that's where we are as a nation, right now, where it's like, there's such a dependence on God to create a breakthrough because the mechanisms of man are failing us on all fronts. And when you realize there's a historical precedent of God's intervention for righteousness in this country, it really is encouraging for the current moment.
That's right.
Oh, it really is. And again, we're fighting the most powerful military on the planet with a ragtag thrown together army. These are guys off their farm. The British would go into the camp or go into the colonies with gold and say, if you give us information and intel on Washington, we'll give you gold. We'll buy your cows for gold. Yet when Washington would need supplies, they would go to the farmer and say, all we can give you these worthless continental pieces of paper that it's an IOU, that if we win, you'll get paid something back. But if not, you're out of it,
Right.
So the General Johnny Burgoyne's army is captured. The British army that was going to march up to Albany instead went and captured Philadelphia. And so Washington is now forced out 25 miles from Philadelphia to Valley Forge. And 2,500 men die of the disease and the freezing, and about 500 women. And I'll tell you a little bit about that as well. But then Washington was not getting supplies, and the states were voluntarily giving money because the Continental Congress had no power to raise taxes. And so it was Virginia Governor Patrick Henry, and he's writing letters to George Washington saying, did you get all the supplies I sent you? And Washington said, no, we're starving to death. And Patrick Henry's like, what? And so he goes to the Continental Congress and finds out that the logistics guy that's supposed to get the supplies is this Mifflin. And he was putting them all in a warehouse and storing them up. And he was part of this cabal that wanted to get rid of George Washington and replace him with another general. And so he, in a sense, wanted Washington to look bad.
It was a deep state then.
No kidding.
Yeah. And so enough pressure got put on, and the supplies finally came, and they were able to feed and clothe the troops. And so in the spring, after that terrible winter, George Washington writes to his troops, to the distinguished character of patriot, it should be our highest glory to laud the more distinguished character of Christian. So again, this is our George Washington. And then some Indians, the Delaware tribe, bring some of their youths to be trained in American schools. And George Washington meets with them and says, you do well to wish to learn our arts and way of life, and above all, the religion of Jesus Christ.
Wow.
And so another story, if I have time,
Yes,
is the betrayal of Benedict Arnold. So Benedict Arnold, he was the hero of the Battle of Saratoga. So we talked about this battle that we captured 6,000 troops. In the middle of the battle, prior to the battle, Benedict Arnold got on the wrong side of the commander. And Benedict Arnold had shown courage before, but he was one that would sort of step over people to get to where he's at, and had no patience. And anyway, so he gets on the wrong side of the general, and he's ordered to sit out the battle in his tent. Well, this is like a total shame. He doesn't want to be sitting in his tent while everybody's fighting. And so he takes a swig of whiskey, hops on his horse, and he rides toward the battle. And he sees that the British have an exposed flank, a side where there's no defense. He gets some guys, they ride straight across the field. They capture a redoubt, which is an embankment where they were shooting from. And after he captures that, it freed up the whole field for the Americans to run across and capture those 6,000 troops. And so Benedict Arnold was the hero of the Battle of Saratoga. He got the glory for it. He was the one in the story everybody talked about. He was wounded in his leg. And so he was switched over to recuperate in Philadelphia. And while he's there, he would be the military governor of Philadelphia. So he had all the power to confiscate goods and to, use them for military purposes. And he's being invited to all the parties. But the British had occupied Philadelphia for about 8 months. And then the British left, but they left some spies. And these were people that sort of blended in and you couldn't really tell. Mm-hmm. And so you have at one of the parties, there is the daughter of a Quaker loyalist, and the name is Shippen, and her name is Peggy Shippen. And she takes a liking to Benedict Arnold, this war hero. And of course, he would be sitting in a chair with his leg up, or he'd have his cane. But everybody like, oh, he's such a courageous guy. And she ends up taking a liking to him, ends up getting married. But her dad was more or less a loyalist, sort of under the cover, under the, quiet, but he was. And but he was wealthy. And so Benedict Arnold decides, well, he's got to buy a big wealthy house for his new wife, but he doesn't have the money for it. So he's sort of stretched financially. And yet at the same time, he's the military governor of Philadelphia, confiscating stuff. And the rumor spread that he was confiscating stuff, selling it on the side to make a little extra money to keep his wife happy. And so he has to go through a trial. They call it a court-martial, but it kept getting put off because of more battles, and they come back around. Oh yeah, we got to get back to Benedict Arnold's trial, and then there'd be another battle. Oh yeah, we got to get back. And it drags on, and Benedict Arnold's like, I'm innocent, but while this is all going on, his wife begins to say to him, if you were in the British Army, they wouldn't treat you this way. You're such a great general. They don't realize what a great guy you are. And if you were in the British Army, they would take care of you. And so lo and behold, she had been keeping in touch with a British spy named John Andre. And the story is that she finally goes to her husband, Benedict Arnold, and after a year of nagging him, convinces him to meet with John Andre, the British spy. And his legs healed up a little bit. And so now he's transferred and he's put in charge of West Point. And West Point is the biggest military base in America. And it is on the Hudson River. And if you control West Point, you control the river traffic, and you can split New York, and you can split America, again, with the middle colonies on one side and the eastern colonies on the other. And so he meets with Benedict Arnold, and he's willing to surrender West Point.
Wow.
And he decides to do it on the very day George Washington is coming to inspect West Point. And so he meets with this British spy, John Andre, and he has a little, what historians think was a little jealousy, because this guy, John Andre, was supposedly handsome and he was keeping in touch with his wife. It's like, okay, what else has been going on? I don't know. And so they meet, and it's John Andre comes up the river, the Hudson River, on a boat called the Vulture, and he gets off. He meets with Benedict Arnold, and before he can get back on the boat, some Americans see the boat, start shooting at it, and it retreats back down the river. And now Benedict Arnold John Andre is stuck there, and he can't get back on the boat. And so Benedict Arnold says, well, come back to my office, my house, on the military base, and we'll have you dress as a civilian. Now, this is something that is military etiquette. If you're captured and you're wearing an enemy uniform, you are kept alive for prisoner exchange later.
Okay.
If you are captured wearing a civilian clothes, you are a spy, you're immediately killed. And so when Benedict Arnold said, oh, just dress as a civilian, that was, and then he said, well, just walk back. Since your boat went down, just walk back across the American land, dress as a civilian, and then you can walk back across the no man's land. Then you can walk back to the British, and here's a map of West Point. And so here's this John Andre. He's walking back, and he goes past the American areas. He's in the no man's land, and he's just about one bridge away from getting back to the British territory. And by the way, this is the Hudson River, and there's the West Point. And for those that this is West Point today, so you can see it goes right out. You can't go up and down the river without going past West Point. And so John Andre is about to make it to the British area when some German Hessian troops come out of the forest and stop him. And if Benedict Arnold would have kept his mouth shut, they probably would have let him across the bridge. But instead, he blurts out, "It's finally good to see some men on our side." And the German Hessian troops say, "Well, what do you mean our side?" He goes, "Well, you're German Hessian troops. You're hired by the British to fight the Americans." And they go, "No, we're American troops dressed as German Hessian troops to try to find people that are disloyal."
Oh.
And he says, "You know what? You don't know who to trust nowadays." And I sort of knew that, but I didn't want to. And he tries to talk his way out of it. And the troops say, "You know what? We're just going to search you." They search him once, they search him twice. They're about to let him go when they get the idea to search his boots. And so they make him take off his boot, and hanging in his stocking on his leg was the map of West Point. And they're looking at this, and they're like, "You didn't tell us about this map." And he goes, "Oh, yeah, the map of West Point." And he tries to talk his way out of it, and they go, "You know what? We're just going to have you come and explain it to our commanding officer." And so they're marching him back toward West Point, where he just came from. And the word spreads, the ripple spreads. "We caught the spy, and the spy had the map of West Point." And they go in and they tell Benedict Arnold, "We caught the spy with a map of your fort." Well, it was just a couple hours ago that Benedict Arnold let him go.
Actually gave it to him. Yeah.
And so Benedict Arnold flees. He gets on that ship called the Vulture. And then that next morning, George Washington shows up because he was going to have breakfast with him. And the Peggy Shippen, the wife, she acts like she went insane. And she's like screaming at George Washington, saying, "It's all your fault, this and that." And she acts like a crazy woman. Anyway, they expose this plot. And so the American general Nathaniel Greene writes, "Treason of the blackest dye was yesterday discovered. General Arnold, who commanded at West Point, was about to give the American cause a deadly wound, if not fatal stab. Happily, the treason had been timely discovered to prevent the fatal misfortune. The providential train of circumstances which led to its discovery affords the most convincing proof that the liberties of America are the object of divine protection." Right? So you got enemies on the outside, you got enemies on the inside. I know it's hard for us to imagine that. Jesus had enemies on the outside,
Yep.
He had Judas on the inside. The president of Yale is Ezra Stiles. And he says a providential miracle at the last minute detected the treacherous scheme of traitor Benedict Arnold, which would have given the American army, including George Washington himself, into the hands of the enemy. And then the Continental Congress is so happy, they have another day of Thanksgiving, right? So the first one was after the Battle of Saratoga. This one is October 18th, 1780. The remarkable interposition of his watchful providence in rescuing the person of our commander-in-chief and army from imminent danger at the moment when treason was ripened for execution, right? So they would have got West Point and they would have got George Washington. And he goes on, it is therefore recommended a day of public thanksgiving and prayer to confess our unworthiness and to offer fervent supplications to the God of all grace to cause the knowledge of Christianity to spread over all the earth. I just think it's interesting. Here they are thanking God Washington and West Point wasn't captured. Oh yeah, we want to thank God that the knowledge of Christianity will spread over all the earth. And
wow, that is incredible.
It's common for people want to dispute that
this was a Christian nation.
That this was a Christian nation. There, there's a lot of what I consider kind of fake news stories, about the intent of these characters that were so pivotal in the founding of our country and the winning of this battle. But when you dig into the character of Washington, clearly he had roots rooted in the Word of God and a face pointed towards God Himself.
Yeah, and I know we're almost out of time, but one last one is the Battle of Cowpens toward the end of the war. The British have a military general named what's his name, Tarleton, and the movie with Mel Gibson talks about this. And so the British Colonel Tarleton, it's a colonel, is chasing the Americans. Daniel Morgan can't get away because he has an entire army, and Tarleton has the light cavalry called the Dragoons. And so he takes a stand in front of a river. Now, you never fight a battle in front of a river because if you are losing, it's hard to run away. And so the British are charging on horseback, and Daniel Morgan has two groups of soldiers, American militia, who have a reputation of shooting once or twice and running away, and then the Continental officers who won't run away. And so the British are charging. The militia fire once, fire twice, they run away. The Continental soldiers act like they're going to run away. And when the British get close, they turn on their heel, they level their guns, and at point blank range, they shoot and kill 100 British Dragoons. And the ones that ran away just ran in a circle and attacked from the side. And the British throw down their weapons and surrender, and they capture hundreds of these British soldiers. And Colonel Tarleton rides off and escapes. And when word gets to Lord Cornwallis, he was leaning on his sword. He leaned so hard that the sword broke, and he is furious. He takes off after the Americans, and Daniel Morgan is now joined by Nathaniel Greene, and they are escaping across these different rivers. And the British try to catch him, but they have an army. So this General Cornwallis decides to leave his wagons behind, but he doesn't want Americans to get him, so he burns them. He comes to the Catawba River just as the Americans were getting out the other side. And before the British can cross, there's a flash flood. The British are delayed. And then the Redcoats are chasing the Americans, which is the blue line. And they get to the Yadkin River. The Americans cross before the British can start crossing, another flash flood. And then this happens a third time at the Dan River. Here's the military marker. It says Boyd's and Irwin's ferries to the west were used by Nathaniel Greene in his passage at Dan River in February 1781, while Cornwallis was in close pursuit. And so they get to the Dan River. They're watching the Americans get out the other side, but before the British can cross, another flash flood. British Commander Henry Clinton writes, here the Royal Army was again stopped by a sudden rise of the waters, which had only just fallen almost miraculously to let the enemy over, who could not else have eluded Lord Cornwallis's grasp, so close was he upon their rear. And so, again, just another miracle. And all these different stories are in the book, Miracles in American History.
This is just amazing. As I'm listening to this, I mean, I just want to encourage you, Flyover family. You know, it's impossible to pray and for something not to happen. We actually just went to, earlier in June, we went to Esther at the Sight and Sound Theater, and it was just a great reminder. She had all of the Jewish people fasting and praying before she went to go meet with the king, and she was fasting and praying herself. And we saw, even in the story of it, obviously when you read the Bible, just miracle after miracle that happened because of prayer. And I just want to encourage everyone, continue to pray. It's impossible for something not to happen when you pray. And this is just a great reminder when you go to AmericanMinute.com, the gift edition, Miracles in American History, 50 amazing stories of answered prayers. This has been so encouraging. Bill, you're such a great teacher. You're very anointed to teach.
Yeah.
You're an incredible historian. This has been a blast.
Well, and you have this depth of knowledge that is so deep. You have this, the study of every constitution of all the colonies and every form of rule throughout human history. But yet you chop it up in these like interesting. I just like want more.
I know, me
Want
too.
more.
Me
Want
too.
more.
I cannot wait to read this book. I love what you said about the dad reading these stories to his kids, to his son, because this is really powerful. This is something we all need to be aware of, and a great way that we can connect with our children as well. So, Bill, thank you so much for your time. Happy 4th of July. Again, go to AmericanMinute.com. Check this book out. And again, Bill, thank you so much for your time. It's been amazing.
Oh, David and Stacy, it's great to be with you.
We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men and women created by the you know the thing.
We will shut you down. We will cite you. And if we need to, we will arrest you and we will take you to jail. Period.
I wasn't thinking of the Bill of Rights when we did this.
But no amendment to the Constitution is absolute.
God actually spoke to me. He spoke about sacredness. He said to me, Kim, what I place in many, many people is sacred. And if anybody touches what is sacred to me, then it is the end for them. So what I've done in the United States of America is sacred. And there are people on every side that are trying to destroy what I deem sacred. And it's not going to happen.
This is the definition of criminal conspiracy, racketeering, and collusion. This is not a theory. This is evidence.
Because I have upheld this country to spread a light to the rest of the world. When you choose to go against the sacred thing that God put to the very heart and the soil of this nation, this was sacred to God.
This ReAwaken tour is literally what it means. It has reawakened the American heart.
All right, folks, the box fan plan is no longer needed. We're bringing the ReAwaken America tour Las Vegas, Nevada indoors, baby. We've got a climate-controlled, beautiful facility that we are building at the beautiful Craig Ranch, which is 7 miles north of the Trump International Hotel. So if you're there and you want it to go well and you don't like the box fan plan, I get it. We now have a climate-controlled indoor facility that will be constructed and built there at the Craig Ranch, 7 miles north of Trump International Hotel, Las Vegas, Nevada. So stay at the Trump International, Las Vegas, Nevada, and then you'll be staying in a climate-controlled facility located there at Craig Ranch. And one good thing you can do, though, if you did buy a box fan, a great vocal exercise that I like to do before every show is this.
La, 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 Luke, I am your father.
Are you having a hard time sleeping at night, thinking, what am I going to do about my finances?
Times are really changing. They're changing fast. Let me give you a quick example of how. In 1920, if you had a $20 bill and 1 ounce of gold, you could go into any men's clothing store and buy an entire suit. You could buy the jacket, the shirt, the belt, shoes, the whole bit. Today, that $20 bill, what's it going to get you?
Not much.
Maybe the socks, maybe a handkerchief, but the 1 ounce of gold could still buy you the entire suit at any men's store in America. That's the difference. That's what inflation does to your dollar. It's a deflating dollar caused by inflation. Now today, that's happening faster than ever. You need somebody that you trust that can help get you out of a fake currency and into something that's going to keep you safe.
And we know a guy that has 2 PhDs by the name of Dr. Kirk Elliott. We have known him for over 25 years, and he's someone we completely trust.
You need somebody that you can get a hold of, somebody that's going to be there for you to get back out of it, and then maybe back into the stock market, maybe back into something else when things settle down. But right now is not that time. You need somebody that you trust and somebody you can call and make those worries go away.
That's exactly right. So you can go to flyovergold.com, fill out your information for a free consultation, or you can call 720-605-3900. Do it today.
You'll be glad you did.
For more great content, go to flyoverconservatives.com.